É um prazer estar aqui convosco para o arranque do Mês da Ciência e Educação 2021 da Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos. Estamos num cenário lindo, imponente, em Lisboa, no Museu da Água, para uma conversa que será certamente fascinante sobre o comportamento do ser humano. Camilla Pang é uma cientista britânica, perita em bioquímica e autora que em 2020 ganhou o conceituado prémio da Royal Society entregue aos melhores livros de ciência do ano. O livro Explaining Humans, What Science Can Teach Us About Life, Love and Relationships explora o que significa ser humano, aborda e disseca relações pessoais e o perfeccionismo também. O que torna todo o trabalho da doutora Pang ainda mais interessante é o facto de ela ter sido diagnosticada com distúrbio do espectro do autismo aos 8 anos de idade e também com déficit de atenção e hiperatividade aos 26. Ou seja, tem um ponto de vista muito original relativamente a todos estes temas. Bem, a introdução está feita, vamos à entrevista, vamos apresentar a doutora Camilla Pang. Dr. Camilla Pang, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on this program celebrating the month of science and education. Really looking forward to our chat. And, I prepared for this session by reading certain interviews you've given in the recent past, and I was really fascinated by the fact that when you were a child, you asked your mother if there was some kind of manual for the human being. And what's interesting about that is that I became a father recently for the first time in my life, and actually asked the same thing to the doctor when I was taking this human being home. Is there a manual for this? Because everything you buy in life that you have in your house, you have some kind of instruction, and there's nothing for the human being. So tell us how you feel that your book aims to help us understand human beings.
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me on here. It's a pleasure. And you're absolutely right. There's a book for almost everything, but when I made it, it came from a place of difference, because being autistic, you look at the world a bit too differently to be able to function normally. And I know that everyone's different, but you feel constantly out of place. And so you're constantly curious and hungry to know how things work. And through being, I guess, a scientist at a young age, without realizing it, I kind of collected lots of different bits of evidence to try and make sense of the world. And to think that someone finds it useful now is incredible, because it used to be a guilty pleasure, but now it's something that actually helps people. So I didn't know it was a manual of humans until it helped people.
I actually should have started the interview also by congratulating on your award, and it's clear that it is helping people and it is garnering attention. Now, you say that by understanding scientific principles, we can better understand our lives as they really are. Could this be a strong argument for promoting scientific culture in any way?
Yes, completely. I think there's two elements of it. The first is acknowledging that science is a business of inquiry, as opposed to just, let's just science it and then that's a solution. It piques the curiosity and the process of thought in others that I feel like is very important, regardless of what profession you're in. And what's the second part of the question? I remember now. And also it helps us question the scientific process itself, because logic can't explain everything. It helps us think outside the box and question the process of questioning. So, for example, if logic can't explain everything, then what can? So that's why I love it, because science is constantly evolving, and the way that we model biology is now doing it justice, as opposed to reduction, making biology simpler so we can understand it. We're at the point now where we've got so much technology, we can use this technology to model biology in a more dynamic way, which is what I do hopefully in my book. That it's, in Explaining Humans, it's quite like basic stuff, but it's
I'll get into that basic stuff a little bit later, but I didn't want to talk to you about the more complex stuff first, which is the fact that you talk about various areas of science in your book, from biochemistry to machine learning. How did you come across all of these different subjects and choose which ones were pertinent to include in this manual?
That's a great question, and it's often a question that I was asking myself when I was making the book. And to me, it was all about making stuff as fundamental as possible. I wanted to make each chapter a common theme, and for that, when I chose the subjects, you know, when you meet a person and then you don't expect to connect with them, you meet someone, you're like, oh yeah, you're a bit of me, I get you. And I didn't get that with people, I got that with information. And I was like, wait a minute, I feel uncomfortable because of this, but then this makes me feel more comfortable. Why is that? And I just let into it. And then over time, I realized that it was a way of modeling it. And I think when it came to the book, that's the same philosophy I used. And also algorithm clustering. I use machine learning as well to help categorize which chapters fit best with each other.
That's good you do, and I'll also talk a little bit more about machine learning. But when it comes to decision making, and this was quite an interesting a part of your arguments, you do make analogies with machine learning, and you argue that one decision tree is better than others. Can you explain that?
One decision tree is better than others. What do you mean by that?
Well,
sorry, I don't
with machine learning and decision making, I guess you can break everything down into the actual variables that affect the decisions, and then how that decision then affects others that come after that.
Yes. So yeah, in terms of the box versus tree thinking, obviously you want to make sure that you have your own back. You can rely on your own judgment to create a sense of contingency, so that wherever you go, you feel like, okay, this might happen. Like each branch, you know, goes with the wind and is quite uncertain. But the more trees you have, the more you're like, okay, if this goes wrong, then it's okay, I can go down this path. And like you say, the different variables of how things could affect. And I think this is why I love tree thinking, because it relaxes me, because it's like, well, things don't always go to plan. If anything, box thinking, which is like, this is going to happen at this time and it's going to happen this way, it's setting yourself up for failure, because you're either there or you're like, oh no. So it prevents catastrophizing.
I'll be honest with you, I've always been very good at making professional decisions and very shaky about making personal decisions, because emotions cloud judgment. And I wanted to ask you about how you split all that up and how you have dealt with those different emotions and different facts regarding different kinds of decisions.
That is a lovely question, and I'm really happy to hear that there is a difference, because when you make professional decisions, it's very easy to just follow logic alone and be like this, and this, and that's great. But also, obviously, personal decisions, you can't follow that by logic alone. It doesn't work, and that's cool. But if anything, I don't rely on logic alone. I can't, because everything is it's like a volcano. I don't really hold back. I think that's really good, because then that helps guide me a bit more of what I actually want to do with my career. What decisions am I making and why? And I think people always think that the less emotions, the better, but it's not, because emotions are the best data that you have in making a decision.
I think when it comes to decision making, when it comes to interaction, obviously the struggles you had growing up allowed you to evolve in that way and really study it, whereas maybe other people haven't done that, and that's what makes your book so pertinent and so interesting. And you really go into the detail of these interactions. And something I found quite interesting was you say how the proteins of living beings can interact and work with each other, and each with its own speciality. How similar can the collaboration between humans be in the collaboration between proteins?
Oh yeah, this is so basically I always wanted to include proteins because I'm a biochemist, and that's basically the bread and butter of it. And so when it comes to looking at the evolution and teamwork and differences, there is a bit of a conformity obsession with humans was if you're a bit different or as if you'll go a bit rogue, then it's kind of looked down upon. It's kind of a risk to be different. Whereas, because I looked at how humans interact in groups and I tried to model that on a football match, I realized that proteins behave in quite a similar way in the cell. And I was like, oh, okay, this is great. When you see this analogy, which is actually a model, you start to see that they all have different roles and they have to adapt depending on where their position is and the demands of the team to score a certain goal. And for me, I really kind of gelled with that. And it reminded me a bit more of cancer. And it's a terrible disease, but it's also something that we can learn from because it has to subsume the different roles of each protein to suit the needs of the cell.
That's curious because that's going to be my next question, which was about what we can learn from cancer cells when it comes to team building and coordinating.
Yeah, cancer is one of the most advanced evolutionary systems we know, and that's because it can adapt and it has a bit of a repertoire of difference that it can use depending on its environment. So, for example, if we have a cell that has a certain genetic profile and it's expressing these proteins to do X, Y, Z, and then we have one that's different to it, they create these clones, a bit like, human clones. You've got different types of populations that are very good at doing different things. And this is one of the reasons why it can adapt so easily, because it can dip in and out of the populations and subsume the different roles. And I think proteins basically orchestrate this process.
You talk about adaptation, and I wanted to ask you about your personal experience, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have Spanish background, Chinese background. Did those two different cultures and experiences also help you adapt? And do you think that's something that humans, especially now with today's technology, where it's so easy to find out more about different cultures and different ways of living and behaving, that helps in everyday life? And did that help you?
Yeah, completely. It's actually, I think I mentioned it in my last chapter of the book about etiquette. And when you're taught different ways that different cultures can be polite at the dinner table, you realize that the rules bend and flex according to different cultures, and it makes you more adaptable. It makes you like, oh, okay, well, in this context, it keeps you context-dependent behavior. So I'm English, Spanish, and Chinese, all mixed together, and it's taught me a lot. It really did, because it made me realize that context is everything from a very young age.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just had many things going on through my brain at the same time, but young age behavior of teenagers, and something you talk about is mess as well, and thermodynamics, and how good an excuse is it for teenagers to use that to justify the disorder that their environment can be in with their parents?
It depends on the parent, really. I mean, every teenager is going to have a point in which they're messy, be it their bedroom or the way they organize their homework, their thoughts. And I think it's all part of the experiment. Like, to this day, whenever I'm thinking about a chapter of my book, or if I'm in transition in a part of my life, my room's a mess because I need to be organized, and it can often reflect what's going on in my mind. I think mess is a bit of conditioning, to be honest. And obviously I love it when it's tidy and I'm relaxed. But I think when it comes to mess, it's hygiene is involved. You want to make sure that it's hygienic. Disorder is one thing, but hygiene is another.
Still on the topic of thermodynamics, one thing is mess, another thing is chaos. In the second law of thermodynamics, how can we live with chaos, and do we try to resist it?
Oh yeah, completely. The second, like you said, the second law of thermodynamics is very much, it's going to be hard to make order in a universe that is destined for disorder, because the difference in entropy is bigger than zero, so therefore things are naturally going to be chaotic unless they're spontaneous. However, this is something that we fight with every day. We've got the frictions of life, even the interaction with someone that you disagree with. That's a disorder, because you're like, oh, everything's different. Everything's, they're going to disagree with me. And then you have less energy. So we spend a lot of energy putting things together. And I think this is where you have to choose your battles. If I know that I've got a difficult week, I'm like, okay, I'm either going to tidy it before or it's going to be happening after. It's just learning to let yourself be like, okay, this week I'm not going to be great at this because I need to be like this. It's learning to know where your battles are. And I think that's essential, because when you have ADHD, when you're autistic, you have to do that every day, because a lot of things that are very normal take up a lot of energy.
How much do you actually now get approached by colleagues and by friends or people in your inner circle for advice on life's circumstances after your book came out and after it had the attention it had? I mean, you talk about dealing with your own issues and it taking up energy. Now that people look at the way you think about behavior in a different way, are you taking up a lot of energy as well with other people's issues and advice that you have to give?
That's a great question. All these are great questions. It's weird because I think I mentioned in one of the chapters that I have often been kind of assumed to not have any empathy because I'm autistic, but actually when you know how to connect, it can energize you, because you're like, it's a very natural place to be, connection, especially when you click and you're giving something to someone that previously you thought you couldn't. So yeah, everything is, when we eat food so that we can live, because energy naturally goes out. But to be able to help someone, that can energize me big time, because it's something naturally I want to communicate the things that I find to help someone, because people have done that all my life. So giving back is a very natural process to me that I actually am energized by.
Are you also energized by the fact that nowadays mental health seems to be a much more accepted subject? And I know in the UK, whether that's in sport or in politics, I mean, it is more of a, I don't want to call it a trending topic, because that kind of takes importance away from it. But is it important that people are spending more time discussing it? And what does that mean to you?
It does, actually, because it means that I'm not just speaking into a brick wall, and that people aren't calling me crazy. I think when you're talking about things that people don't quite understand, they can call you crazy because they don't know what you mean. Even what you say is valid. However, there is a space now that people can talk about these things and not feel embarrassed, not have the shame. And I feel like lockdown has really helped that, because it's made people have the empathy to feel like it's okay to not be okay. And that's really good. So that is something that is important to me. And it energizes me, because I'm like, it's a relief. It's not something I have to fight against or have to apologize for. So yes, it's nice.
Do you think that helps other girls, other boys who are younger now, who maybe had similar issues that you had, but there wasn't that kind of attention on the subject, and it wasn't seen as, like you said, as normal to be okay, to not be okay?
I think so. I think there's a lot. I think communicating it helps, but I do think social media and toxic positivity can be something that is quite damaging, because mental health is something that is acknowledging of that people aren't okay. But sometimes mental health can be something like, oh, don't be sad, be positive. And it kind of invalidates what you're feeling and kind of blames you for not feeling positive, when actually you need to sort some stuff out. So it depends on how mental health is delivered. And I think that toxic positivity can actually make someone depressed. There's actually a very interesting book on it. Not my book, unfortunately, because it's a book that mentions about mental health and how being too positive with all these quotes can actually make you go downhill. But it's accepting that today is not a good day, and that's okay. If I only just make it to the fridge, then brilliant.
Well, I think you're still young enough to write a book on that if you want. Let's get back to the book you have released, and you wrote that understanding cellular evolution has helped you to realize two things fundamental to maintaining good relationships: respect the difference and patience. How can cells teach us to live happily ever after?
So when it comes to cellular evolution, for example, you have like a stem cell, or if you're in the embryo, you're kind of a big ball of cells, which are kind of pretty much the same. The edges are a bit different, but those edges create all these different limbs and layers and ways in which the human body can form from this, tube of 3 layers, and then it diverges, but over time. So it's this parallel with Bayes' theorem, which is looking at the different paths of how things can happen, and the more likely they are to happen, giving something else before it. So a conditional probability. So this is very reflective of the structure of how cells evolved. But when it comes to perseverance, it's something that doesn't happen overnight. Like my anxiety can make a cancer. I'm like, oh, I've got cancer. It's happening in my arm, but I'm like, well, it's not, because cancer isn't actually that fast. Even though in my mind it can go quite fast. But what I'm trying to say is that even the most advanced evolutionary system takes its time, and it's something that I learn primarily when interacting with people. When I think that something's gone wrong, or if I'm projecting too far, you haven't got the data or enough of it to draw a conclusion. So you have to kind of take your time and know that things are different and it's not your fault. And if anything, it makes it better. So it's, I can elaborate, but.
How do you coach yourself through that process of patience? And when you are going through experiences, how much do you actually draw upon your book on the scientific explanation of behavior versus what you're feeling at that specific time?
So I'm actually not that patient person. I'm very impatient, and I think that's because I just naturally I am. ADHD doesn't help, but I like to know what's happening. And so I think this is where the thinking it through and intellectualizing it somewhat creates that time and space needed for me to think about it and also give it its own time. So I can't just do nothing. If you say to me, wait and do nothing, it will be the longest time in the world. And I think for me, I have to fill it with something else so that I feel like I'm doing something, or I'm not just waiting. And this is something that I've done all the time. For example, I'm waiting to understand humans. It's like fate or good luck. Good luck doesn't just come to you. You kind of have to do the work for it.
I actually use that a lot. That good luck takes a lot of work. I think I've used that in my life a lot when things work out. It's like you see the tip of the iceberg. You don't see many times what's underneath that. You talk about chemical bonds, relationships between humans. Obviously, some bonds are more stable, others more unstable, more unpredictable. Is it easier to understand relationships between humans through analogies with chemical bonds? And if so, how is that? How can you explain that in a not very complicated scientific way?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. When you're in school, you are trying to fathom how different people glue together in different ways. And for me, I didn't really bond with many people. I had like one best friend that I'd hang around with, and then other people I just tried to actually get on with. And when you see the different, I guess, the malleabilities of people and how they stick together and how they behave when they're together and apart, you start to realize that it's a different nature. And for me, when it came to understanding bullying, it reminded me of the hydrophobic effect, because you have people that are sticking together based on not liking what's on the outside. That's why oil and water, the oil goes together, energetically, because it doesn't want to interact with the outside environment. Where there are other people that are more stable on their own. When they come together, it's more dynamic. So I love the differences in how people behave separately and together. And for me, this is, especially when you're looking at like different types of bond, which are kind of on the opposite ends of the chemical spectrum, but actually, they're actually quite similar if you get two different atoms. It's not like, oh, you got this bond on this bond. They're just two ends of the spectrum. And that's what I love about it, because you can have people that can evolve throughout time. It can at first be very dynamic, like, yay, but then over time it can be a lot more stable. So enables you to see things as a spectrum of interactions, as opposed to be like, okay, you're my bestie, you're not my bestie.
How has social media changed these bonds, and especially during the pandemic when so many people were stuck at home? And I think about teenagers who should be having normal human interactions are now basically doing so over Zoom or the phone or emojis. I mean, how have you seen the difference from when you were growing up to the way today's youth is growing up and the interactions and the bonds they create?
Yeah, great question. And I think this is also the language in which people define friendship. Back in, I guess the 90s or the thousands, we were playing with Tamagotchis and, things that were physical, and you would have a kind of, a politic on the playgrounds that you'd kind of know how to trust in people that you didn't think were trustworthy, and also be disappointed by those you weren't. It's all about the language and how we interact. And these days it's more on the PlayStation. So or online. So even though we don't have, someone hitting me with a ball or grabbing my arm to make sure I'm safe, we have a language online. For example, if you like my TikTok post, it's the kind of the same thing. Obviously, it's very virtual, but it's about the language in which we communicate and what that means with respect to that generation, which is one of the reasons why if someone says, oh, why do you like my Instagram post? It's really small and petty, but actually when that's the language of your friendship, at that age, it can actually be quite important. And I think this is why reading into things that are very small, such as emojis and likes and kisses on the end of text messages, can be a lot more important because that's their language.
It's funny because I do tell my friends sometimes with emojis, it's like we've gone back to the time of hieroglyphics where,
yeah,
it's just communicating. Yeah. Communicating in drawings sometimes and in GIFs, it's crazy. But for today's youth, that's the way they're being brought up. Look, you do say that fear is like light. Why is that?
So I make this. A lot of people call it a metaphor, and it is a metaphor. But for me, it was a scientific model when I was about 7. And when you're autistic, you are processing life on a higher level of granularity, aka every detail is a detail. There's not a narrative involved. You're like, everything's just an overload. And so you can very easily be triggered into a meltdown where everything feels like blinding. You can't see. And when I was little, I saw my mum have this kind of crystal oyster shell on her windowsill that when the sun came in, it would refract light onto the wall of her bedroom. And I used to love that. And it was just really fun. But also I looked into the science of it because I was like, why is that light white? And I can't actually see it. And why is that colourful? And I started questioning the nature of light. And I looked at in my encyclopedia for the same image. I looked at images, not words. That's how I understood it. Because I never looked for, I knew it was a prism. I just knew what it looked like and felt like. And for me, I was like, I need to be that prism. And over time, I realized that much like how the prism interacts with light and its wavelengths, it slows it down to such an extent that it creates that sense of clarity that you need to take the next steps in fear. And for me, I needed to be in a dark room. I was like, I need to be in a dark room. I need to get everything out, zero everything so I can think, what am I feeling? Why? And how do I do it? Because I didn't want to be afraid of things all my life, because that's no way to live for anyone. And you have to be transparent enough to do that.
Yeah, it's quite clever that. Couple of final questions. You did mention etiquette when we talked about different cultural experiences and the way that you took in what your environment, or what any of us take in what our environment gives us. Do you have a couple of funny or embarrassing situations that you dealt with regarding etiquette and how you dealt with those?
Oh goodness, oh my goodness, the story of my life. I'm gonna try and narrow it. I'm gonna try and narrow it down. But yeah, I think I mentioned one in my book of how, like, for example, if someone rings and I answer the phone, and I'm like, hi, and like, hi, is your mum there? And then I'll be like, yeah, she is. All right, bye. Like, done.
Yeah.
And I take it literally, like, yeah, she is. All right, bye. Thanks for asking. So sometimes I don't quite get things, but it's funny, and I wouldn't want to get rid of that because that just creates life, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it's also funny when we think about those phones that you used to have at your house and you pick up. Now nobody really has those phones anymore. Everybody's on mobile phones.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, that takes me back to my youth too. Final question: taking into account the success of your book, Explaining Humans, have you thought about an encore? Have you thought about what else you'd like to explore?
Yes, I have actually, and I've got a children's book coming out next March. That is a scientific survival guide to growing up, and that is exciting. I'm writing that as we speak, but I'm also writing another book which isn't out yet in terms of the press. I can't really talk about it, but it's a very exciting encore from Explaining Humans that is more about the scientific process, answering the bigger questions that everyone asks, and not just myself. So it's very exciting. So yeah, watch this space.
Okay, well, I wish you the best of luck with that. Congratulations again on the success you've had so far, and I guess more on the book, on being able to learn how to make the most out of the experiences you've had. And yeah, look forward to seeing what else is coming our way. Thanks for spending time with us, talking about this subject in such a transparent and honest way, and wish you all the best. Take care, Camilla.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you.
Foi na verdade um prazer falar com a doutora Camilla Pang sobre a experiência de vida que ela tem e da forma como tenta utilizar a ciência para explicar o comportamento humano e dar dicas de alguém que sofreu com autismo durante a sua infância, que também tem problemas relativamente à capacidade de gerir a atenção e a concentração na sua vida cotidiana. O livro Explaining Humans teve imenso sucesso em 2020. Vamos ver como se vão portar as próximas obras desta doutora, desta autora. Eu, do meu lado, aprendi bastante com ela e vamos ver o que é que temos mais para digerir no futuro. Foi o primeiro programa do Mês da Ciência e Educação 2021 da Fundação Francisco Manuel dos Santos. Até breve.